The 80s and 90s produced some of the most legendary supercars the world has ever known. Cars like the Lamborghini Countach, the Lamborghini Diablo, and the Ferrari F40 will forever be displayed on the walls of car enthusiasts and dreamt about for years to come. Just seeing if you were paying attention. You're right. None of the cars you just saw were produced by Ferrari or Lamborghini, and in fact, only one of them was Italian. So flip up those pop-up headlights, because in this video, we're talking about 3 forgotten supercars from the 1990s. What do you get when an American automotive engineer combines his love of fighter jets with European supercar design and turns everything up to 11? The Vector W8. The W8 was pioneered by Gerald Weigart, who had worked as a design consultant at all of the big 3 American auto companies throughout the 70s. Prior to the arrival of the W8, Weigart's Vector Aeromotive Corporation produced a functional prototype for an American supercar known as the W2 back in 1978. Even though development began in the 70s, the W8 didn't see production until the 1990 model year due to funding issues. That meant that it kept its cool wedge shape and retro design language, while other cars were starting to ditch angles for curves. Vector even used the marketing term aeromotive engineering to describe the car in reference to both their manufacturing methods and styling. Check out the interior. There's a screen for telemetry, and the driver's seat is shifted towards the center of the car. The transmission lever is even mounted to the left of the driver. If that doesn't scream fighter jet, I don't know what does. Cool styling? Check. What's next on the list for an American supercar? Power. And the W8 had a lot of it. Jerry didn't mess around and fitted the W8 with a 6-liter Rodec aluminum racing V8. But that wasn't enough, so for good measure, he threw on a couple of turbos. The end result was an advertised 625 horsepower and 649 pound-feet of torque. Vector also reportedly dynoed the engine with the boost cranked up to 14 psi and made almost 1200 horsepower. Oh yeah! Engine aside, the W8 featured even more race car goods, like 13-inch brake rotors with 4-piston calipers all around, double wishbone suspension up front, and adjustable shocks. Rounding things out, squaring things off for the Vector W8 were carbon and Kevlar body panels mounted to an aluminum monocoque chassis to secure its supercar status. What about the transmission? You saw the lever earlier, and it turns out the W8 only came with a 3-speed automatic, a highly modified version of the GM THM 425 to be exact. I know what you're thinking. Why did a supercar have a modified version of a transmission used in motorhomes? The most likely explanation is the car's ridiculous torque output. There wasn't much off the shelf back then that could reliably handle what the W8's engine would throw at it, so a 3-speed automatic with components modified for strength actually made some sense. So that's the car. But did people buy it? Sources vary, but production numbers of the W8 were estimated at somewhere between only 19 and 22 cars. Road and Track magazine greatly praised nearly every aspect of the car, while Car and Driver failed to complete testing due to all 3 of their press cars reportedly breaking down. Tennis star Andre Agassi also returned his W8 after the rear carpeting burnt up from high exhaust temperatures. With the mixed press and steep asking price of over $400,000, Vector struggled and fell into receivership in 1993. Vector went on to produce a couple more cars after that, but we'll save those for another time. Love it or hate it, you have to give credit to Weigart and his team for developing something daring and really unusual for the American car market. Next up is the only Italian car in this video, which fittingly was developed by a group of ex-Lamborghini employees. The Cizeta-Moroder V16T was an unlikely collaboration between an Italian automotive engineer and a music producer credited for popularizing Eurodisco and electronic music. Claudio Zampoli worked as an engineer for Lamborghini and eventually moved to the US with the goal of setting up a dealership network. In the meantime, he opened up an exotic car repair shop in California, specializing in Italian cars. Giorgio Moroder was a longtime customer at the shop and agreed to put up funding to help Zampoli with his dream of developing a supercar. Zampoli hired the man responsible for the Countach, the Miura, and prototypes for the Diablo, Marcello Gandini, as the chief designer. The V16T's design was actually based on one of Gandini's Diablo prototypes that didn't make the final cut at Lamborghini, and had not 2, but 4 pop-up headlights. Now let's skip ahead to what you're probably wondering about: the engine. As the name implied, the V16T did actually have a V16 engine, but nobody made a V16 engine Cizeta could buy. So how did they pull that off? A special casting was designed for a 16-cylinder engine block, and the company used parts from the Lamborghini Urraco V8 to build the engine. This meant that the final engine had a single block, but 4 separate cylinder heads, for a total of 8 camshafts and 64 valves, with the camshafts being driven from the middle of the engine. All of that got you 540 horsepower, 400 pound-feet of torque, and a car that sounded like an angry wildcat. The engine was transversely mounted, which made the car wide, really wide, 3 inches wider than a Testarossa. The car's chassis was a tubular space frame, like you'd find on a race car, and it had double wishbone suspension in both the front and the rear. Unfortunately, the V16T was met with challenges similar to the W8, ranging from funding to compliance with US safety regulations, and it's estimated that only around 13 were produced between 1991 and 2003. Interestingly enough, Cizeta's website still exists to this day, with an order form for the original car, and it's rumored that an Italian entrepreneur may be trying to develop a new car under the same name. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Making headlines as the first manufacturer to become involved with Formula E, Venturi has a history of pushing boundaries, stretching into their Global Challenge series today, which tests electric vehicles in extreme conditions. But travel back to the 90s, and you would have found the French company hard at work developing a supercar. The Venturi 400 was developed first and foremost to be an actual race car, aimed at people with too much money who wanted to be racing drivers. Stéphane Rattel, who was Venturi's Director of Competition Services, was credited with launching the Gentleman Drivers Trophy, which was a spec series for the Venturi 400 trophy, similar to Lamborghini Super Trofeo or Porsche Cup. Rattel wanted to provide a true arrive and drive experience, meaning that Venturi would equally prepare all of the cars and perform any maintenance. It's estimated that around 73 400 trophies were built for racing, and the series ran for 4 seasons. Taking place at tracks like the Nürburgring, Paul Ricard, and Circuit de la Sarthe, the series aimed to establish Venturi as a legitimate player in the supercar market. 1994 also saw the Augusta racing team compete in the 24 Hours of Le Mans with Venturi 400s. So let's talk about the car. The 400 trophy was powered by a twin turbocharged version of the PRV V6, an engine developed jointly by Renault, Volvo, and Peugeot. With the turbos, the engine made around 400 horsepower and about 385 pound-feet of torque. Making use of mainly carbon fiber bodywork, the 400 trophy was quite light, weighing in at only about 2,400 pounds. As a comparison, that's about 400 pounds lighter than a Honda S2000. But what if you didn't want to race and wanted to drive the French F40 on the street instead? By the time the Gentleman Drivers Trophy series was over, people had already begun converting the 400 trophy into a road-legal car. Venturi hopped on the trend themselves and made their own conversion, known as the 400 GT, which featured a more comfortable interior and other small tweaks, like a catalytic converter. The resulting car weighed a little more, but was largely unchanged from the race version. It even kept the race car's carbon brakes as standard, which was a first for a production car at the time. Far more rare than the Ferrari F40, it's estimated that only around 15 400 GTs were produced by Venturi between 1994 and 1997. The company was sold in 2000, and their focus started shifting towards electric vehicles. So that finishes out the list of 3 90s supercars you may have never heard of. Which of these cars was your favorite? Also, let me know if you want to see separate videos on any of these cars. There's way more to talk about that we can't possibly cover in this video alone. Thanks for watching.